Thank you for joining us for the Japan Foundation online event. My name is Junko Takekawa, Senior Arts Program Officer, Japan Foundation, London. If I asked you to name some great Japanese novelists, who would you come to mind? Akutagawa Ryunosuke, Mishima Yukio, Kawabata Yasunari, and Murakami Haruki, if we are talking about our time. DAZAI Osamu should also be one to remember. In his relatively short life, full of ups and downs, he wrote numerous novels and still provides a source of inspiration to his contemporaries today. His influences have been seen not only in the form of film, drama, theater, and even manga, but also in everyday life, like in 1948, when Shayozoku became a buzzword in Japan, taking after his novel Shayo, the setting sun. There is also a literary award named after him. All of these tell of his popularity and importance. In the run-up to the upcoming stage production of Goodbye at the Coronet Theatre by the Chiten Theatre Company from Japan, we have invited to this roundtable discussion a group of panelists who are all connected to DAZAI works in one way or another. They are Irena Hayter, Associate Professor of Japanese Studies at the University of Leeds, who have taken up DAZAI for the subject of her doctorate. Irene will give us a brief introduction to DAZAI's life and work, and they will act as a moderator of today's roundtable discussion. Jagoda Kamov, theater director, writer, and actress, who is hoping to put one of DAZAI's works on the UK stage in the future. MIURA Motoi, representative and director of the theater company Chiten from Japan, and James Garza, assistant professor of translation studies at the International Christian University in Tokyo, who is currently working on the translation of one of DAZAI's works with Irene. Thank you so much for your time. However much knowledge you have on DAZAI, I'm sure you will make some interesting discoveries through this discussion. I myself look forward to hearing from them. Next, housekeeping matters. Today's event will be recorded. As we are using the webinar function, your names will not be viewable by other attendees. However, I strongly recommend you to keep your audio and video turned off throughout, just in case. If you have any questions for the speakers, please use the Q&A function to send in your question at any time. Remember that attendees' question can be seen by everybody else, so that you can upvote a particular question you would like to see it answered, or if it is the same as yours. Simply click the thumb up icon next to the question you wish to upvote. Unfortunately, due to time restrictions, we may not be able to pick up all of your questions, so my apologies in advance. Lastly, as always, we will send you an online questionnaire afterwards, so please spare a quick moment to complete it to help improve our future event. That's all from me. Now, Irene is already showing up in her face, very eager to start, so I will hand it over to Irene to give us that brief introduction. So over to you.
Hello, everybody. Hello to my co-panelists and for everybody who is joining us to think about DAZAI and talk about DAZAI. So I'll start with a very brief overview of DAZAI's life and work. I hope you can, I'm trying to start at the slideshow. Yes, I hope you will be able to see my screen now. So, sorry, this wasn't meant to be the first slide. So DAZAI was born in 1909 in the north of Japan, so quite a poor agricultural area, although his family was a very wealthy landowning family. So he was a precocious child. He completed the 5-year course of the high school in 4 years only. He entered Tokyo Imperial University in 1930. His subject was French literature. So he was somebody from the countryside, speaking in quite a thick northern accent, actually, who, you know, went to the metropolis, to Tokyo, to study. And at that point, Tokyo was really, you know, a very full-blown metropolis, even sort of reconstructed after the disastrous earthquake in 1923. Fellow writers from the time noted that Tokyo at that time had a lot more in common, say, with Berlin or with Paris than with the Japanese countryside. So there was this kind of a conflict, probably a sense of dislocation that I personally think plays out in some of Dazai's works as well. Some of them are sort of kind of narratives of modernist alienation, while in other works, he kind of returns to the folk tale, to the traditions of pre-modern Japan, and of his and of the storytelling of his native place. It's difficult to say, well, how fully committed was Dazai to Marxist politics in his youth. It is sort of mentioned by some literary historians, but the consensus is that he was one of the people who was sort of fascinated by leftist ideas, but he wasn't really a leftist activist. But some of these ideas come across, especially in his very early work, they're quite similar to the topics of proletarian literature. In the early 30s, Dazai was also loosely associated with a different literary movement, the so-called Japanese Romantics, who rejected Japan's modernization project. They were very critical towards modern life at the time and its Americanism, Hollywood cinema, jazz cafes, and they were critical of Japan losing its soul and what they saw as the mediocre present as compared to the past. But Dazai was never fully committed to a literary movement or fully identifying with it. He remained his kind of own idiosyncratic voice throughout his literary career. His private life was very, very turbulent, and you know, quite a lot of critics and historians have focused on this very sensational private life, although I would suggest that we focus on his works. However, we should perhaps mention that throughout his relatively short life, he died when he was turning 39. He was plagued by addiction. He had 2 marriages, but also quite a lot of relationships outside marriage. He seems to have been a deeply ethical person, and probably some of these kind of conflicts were the reasons behind sort of multiple, unfortunately, suicide attempts. His first suicide attempt was in 1930. After that, he was expelled from university and he was disowned by his family. So he had to earn his living and support a family purely by writing, by his literary works. In 1935, his novella, The Flowers of Buffoonery, Doke no Hana in Japanese, and the short story title Against the Current, or Gyakko, was shortlisted for the Akutagawa Prize. This is the literary prize in Japan that marks young writers, up-and-coming writers' entry into the literary establishment. So the stakes were very high for Dazai, but unfortunately he didn't win it. A much more kind of straightforwardly realist work won the prize, while these two, Flowers of Buffoonery and Against the Current, are quite experimental with their multiple narratives and multiple narrators. So probably that wasn't very much the taste of the judges. In 1935, his first collection of works comes out as well, The Final Years. James Garza, one of our co-panelists today, is translating this in full for the first time. So from his very debut in the literary world, there was this connection between his suicide attempts, the media notoriety around them as a sort of, you know, he was a bohemian, his family was rich, and his father was even a member of the House of Peers at some point. And Dazai, quite a lot of his works actually work around this kind of a notoriety. So they're not straightforwardly confessional, although they draw on his private life. What he does is he sort of cites or parodies or kind of scrutinizes these biographical details, and even the so-called I novel, which was the dominant mode of the novel in Japan at the time. In 1944, he publishes Tsugaru, a very, very different narrative, a travelogue, in which he literally goes back to his village community and kind of celebrates being part of this community and being sort of part of its festivals. So quite different in tone from his very modernist works from before. And this kind of shows sort of his kind of quite confidence and mastery of different styles and different idioms. So he worked with folk tales, rewriting them, putting different motifs together. Also, he refers to sort of Western myths and Greek myths and Western classics, such as Hamlet. He has a story called The New Hamlet. The true literary success came for Dazai in 1946 with a novella called Villon's Wife, or The Wife of François Villon, Renaissance French poet and bandit, and also a novel called The Setting Sun. Both of these works represent sort of the dislocation and upheaval of the war years and the early post-war years. The occupation, the whole kind of upheaval of the social structure. So they're quite sort of melancholy, pessimistic narratives that I never joined in sort of this idea that, you know, the post-occupation Japan was, you know, embarking on this road of democracy and the past was forgotten and everything was good. In 1948, he published his last completed work, No Longer Human, which is probably his most widely known work, both in Japan and in the Anglophone world. Again, there's a lot of modernist alienation and despair about, you know, a character who is totally alienated from his surroundings. But also people, more mature readers, would sort of find quite a lot of adolescent self-absorption in it. And I personally think this is the reason why the novel speaks to younger readers. So this was published before his suicide in 1948. He left a work called Goodbye, which is sort of the focal point of the performance by Chiten, directed by MIURA Motoi-san, that will come to London next week. So quite unusually for a writer from his age, you know, from this sort of the trans-war writers who started writing before the war and wrote in the immediate after-war years, Dazai's works have remained consistently popular. Both the translations and the originals have remained in print, especially No Longer Human has, by the end of the 20th century, had sold around millions of copies in Japan, and I'm told that the paperback edition still sells 100,000 copies a year. He's particularly popular among young readers, as I said, and there are periodical Dazai booms. I would ask my panelists to sort of to think about the reasons behind the current Dazai boom. And the question is, why are you know, artists and theater directors like MIURA Motoi-san and Jagoda Kamov interested in Dazai now? Why are publishers interested in his work? And if I could offer very briefly some of my own thoughts on this. Dazai wrote at a time when literature as a genre confronted the first media age, the cinema, the radio, the phonograph records, a very kind of powerful print media. And in his works, he very much sort of stages and reflects this kind of the confrontation of literature with a world in which literature is becoming simply a mediatized commodity, and the writer as well is becoming a commodity. In a way, Dazai was conscious of it. He was probably Japan's first literary celebrity. he was sort of very kind of controlling and carefully crafting his own image in the media. He was very careful about how his photographs are taken, how they're published. But there's also something about his style, about the way he directly often refers to his, addresses his readers, calls them you, even asks them questions in his work. So I would imagine for a lot of young readers, this is sort of a sense of validation to a certain extent. His themes of kind of youthful alienation, these ideas of rites of passage and stuff, even sort of the narcissism of youth, I think are still kind of lived through by every generation. And just kind of to wrap up again, to stress that Dazai sort of was very good at manipulating style and language. Language is very important to him. He is good at sort of clowning around, creating parody. And I think he would have appreciated the fact that now he's the lead character in a manga, in an anime called Literary Stray Dogs, which is sort of a very straightforward, gangster action, sort of supernatural thriller sort of story, very different from his own works. So this is just a very, very brief introduction from me. And I would like to invite my co-panelists to switch their cameras and microphones and join me in a discussion of Dazai, of his work and his popularity now. So welcome to Miura-san. I will stop sharing my screen.
はい、よろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いします. So I won't spend time introducing us all. Takekawa-san already did that at the beginning of this discussion. So I would suggest that first we talk a little bit about Dazai's significance. And I would like to ask each of my panelists about that. So for example, Miura-san and Jagoda after that, why are contemporary artists and theater directors attracted to Dazai's work? Why is he interesting to them?
そうですね。今お話しいただいたように若者に非常に人気で、私も確かに中学生、高校で太宰を読みました。
Yeah, you're quite right about it. I read Dazai when I was at high school.
で、その時は別に演出家になるなんて演劇をやるなんて全く考えていませんでした。
And I would never thought that I would become a playwright, a theater director.
それで演劇をやるようになって、ふとしたきっかけで、もしかして太宰治って演劇に向いてるんじゃないかなっていう、大人になってからまた考え直すわけです。
Then I just came up with this idea. Well, Dazai would have wanted to do theater, once I became a theater director.
一つの特徴として、その太宰は道化っていうことを一つのテーマにして、語りかけるように、読者に、やるのが一つの、一番強い、特徴だと思います。
The biggest characteristics is that, I mean, as you said, in a clowning, and also he's talking to the readers directly.
あと彼はその役者になりたいっていうことも書いていたりしますから、非常に演技っていうものと結びつくというふうに考えられます。
And also, he actually wrote that he wanted to be an actor. So I think, again, there's a connection to acting, theater here.
それともう一つ最大の特徴は、彼は嘘と本当っていうのをうまくトリッキーに書くことが上手ですので、演技するっていうのはもしかしたらこれは本当なのか嘘なのかっていうことを行ったり来たりしますから、そういうところが演劇に向いているのかなというふうに思って、太宰を扱ってきました。
And also the biggest theme about Dazai is truth and lies. And again, that's pretty much similar to acting, whether this is the actor, the character, or the character isn't necessarily true, or is he actually lying? So I think there's a really big, good connection between acting, theater, and Dazai's works.
とりあえず以上です。
That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I bring in Jagoda then? So Jagoda, you're an actress and a director who's actually somebody outside the field of Japan studies. Why is that interesting for you?
So I was introduced to the DAZAI in high school as well. Yeah, I read his first book from him was No Longer Human. And obviously, when you're a teenager, you do feel very alienated from the world, and you feel self-absorbed. You're very much into I, and it's just stuck after that in my head. But as well, I felt very personally connected. I felt like he's speaking to me personally. So when I entered my 20s and I moved to London, I reread it again in English. And when I read it again, I felt again this connection. And then I realized that it doesn't matter in which language was written, that there's a connection there. The way his words were simple, but then the way he expressed himself, you feel like, okay, he's talking to me, and I understand this feeling. I have been there, and I never thought I would be a theater director as well. And I ended up doing directing, and then now taking on this book, and just last year I started exploring nihilism quite a lot, and which brought me back over to DAZAI, and as well No Longer Human. It's such a complex characters to explore, and the psychology of it. It has a depth, and it has a lot of multi-layers that as an actor and as a director you can creatively just really explore. So due to that, obviously you want to bring the DAZAI into the theater, and the way he's expressing himself in a book is very which is, again, it can be toward to the audience. So due to that, yeah, that's why. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you mentioned the fact that you've reread DAZAI in English translation, because actually I remember now that the translator of No Longer Human, Donald Keane, he also says similar things, that his style is sort of very refreshingly free of sort of cherry blossoms or Zen Buddhist terms or something. It's a very easy sort of to connect to in a way. And let me bring James in. So James is as DAZAI's translator, one of the latest translators of DAZAI. Why do you think publishers have been interested in DAZAI, and why are they still interested in DAZAI in the Anglophone world? Translators as well.
Yeah, great question. I think the ways of the publishing world are frequently mysterious, but I think there's it's a combination of things. And one of the biggest reasons is something that you've mentioned already, the popularity of the manga and anime series Bungo Stray Dogs, or Literary Stray Dogs. It's proven to be the source of many memes on TikTok, and a kind of gateway for TikTok users to begin reading DAZAI, and particularly Ningen Shikaku, No Longer Human, the novel that Jagoda mentioned. And one of the main sort of activities seems to be posting reaction videos that are people expressing their shock at the huge difference between this kind of fantasy anime version of DAZAI, who is depressed and suicidal, but still kind of funny and cute, and the historical DAZAI, or his alter egos in fiction, which are frequently making, misogynistic remarks and behaving in really depraved ways. But it seems to be something that an experience that fans bond over rather than simply condemning. And I think publishers are really keen to utilize these TikTok users to their own advantage. I've seen this kind of reader described as a prosumer. So like, unlike traditional readerships, they're not just consumers, but they're involved in producing their own content with the potential for going viral in a way that wasn't possible in the past in book marketing. And one of the really fascinating things about it to me is that DAZAI fans don't even have to like DAZAI's, the real DAZAI's work to participate in the fandom. So for instance, one of the TikToks I saw, it had something like 45,000 views. It was someone with a copy of No Longer Human, and they filled their bathroom sink with water, and they drowned the book. And there was a caption that said, "This is what Bungo Stray Dog fans do after reading No Longer Human and discovering the sort of nihilism that's in the work." So I think that's one reason, and another reason has to do with the genre that DAZAI wrote in. I think you mentioned this before, the I novel. One way of understanding it is a kind of like thinly veiled autobiographical fiction, right? And it's been like 100 years since the heyday of that genre in Japan, but now in the Anglophone world, we have this category of autofiction, and there's no real single definition of it, but there are definite similarities. Usually there's a character with the same name as the author in the book. And the idea is that it's supposed to be sort of truthful about the self, but not necessarily factual. And so I think the existence of this very marketable category in the Anglophone world is also helping kind of spur this latest boom.
Mm. Indeed, and I sort of kept thinking while listening to all of you that I would have, approved of all that, of the way his works have been used, because DAZAI himself actually was, he was very sensitive to language. He liked sort of quoting and splicing things together. And when I was reading about the method of MIURA-san and his Chiten company, that they like kind of putting together different quotes from different sources in a text, it sort of struck me that one of the first short stories in this first collection, Leaves, is basically, so that I took quotes and passages from his previous stories. So I want to go to MIURA-san again and ask him about this performance. It's titled Goodbye. Is Goodbye the most important work to draw on, or is it a focal work? And what other works come into the performance?
実は私はグッドバイを演出する前に、もうすでに、3、4本を太宰治の作品を扱っています。トカトントンっていう作品を扱ったり、社用っていうものもコラージュしたりしています。他には駆け込み訴えっていうのも一緒に作ったりしています。その他にはおとぎ造詞っていうのも扱っています。
So I've already actually made 3-4 theater productions based on DAZAI's works. I've done Toka Tonton, The Sound of Hammering, Shayo, Setting Sun, and Kakekomi Utae, Heed My Plea, and Otogi Zoshi, as in Otogi Zoshi. So yeah, I've already worked on his pieces.
これらの作品演出した時っていうのはやはり起承転結とか物語っていうのを非常にお客さんに楽しんでもらうために作ってきたわけです。
So the reason was purely because I wanted the audience to enjoy the storytelling, the way he told stories. I want the audience to enjoy that, and also the structure, good beginning, middle, and ending, that kind of string that put through different episodes and characters.
ただこういう作品をやってるとどうしても何か太宰治がやってる意味っていうか 何かもう少し先のものがあるんじゃないかなと、自分が太宰に感銘を受けていることが抜け落ちてるんじゃないかなっていう不安に駆られるわけですね。
So having done a few of Dazai's works, I thought, oh, why am I doing this? There should be a deeper meaning for me to do this, and why? And I have to get back to the feeling that I had when I first read his books, how deeply impressed and moved by his works.
となると、太宰が優れた物語を書くわけですけども、一旦そこから解放されてみたいっていう、わがままな気持ちが起こるわけです。
And I wanted to liberate myself from Dazai, who's a great storyteller, but I thought I could do a little bit more.
で、グッドバイっていう作品は彼の遺作、最後の作品で、ほとんど何も書かないうちに未完で終わってしまうわけですね。
So Goodbye is his last work, but he hardly wrote anything, as a matter of fact.
太宰治にグッドバイっていう意味も込めて、あるいは物語からもグッドバイっていう意味を込めて、もうこれまでの太宰の作品すべてから一行レベルでもいいから彼の叫びというか何か強いものを構成してみたらどうかっていうのが最初の動機でした。
So Goodbye means to me goodbye to Dazai. I wanted to say goodbye to my old self, have to follow everything that he wrote. So I really needed to liberate myself. And also I wanted to take essence and also even a single line. If I pick a single line, I hope that I could actually express his cry, his emotions. And I wanted to, in a way, reconstruct his storytelling.
グッドバイという作品はそういう意味では太宰論でもあり作家論になればいいなというような意味で、構成して作ったわけです。
So that's sort of my take on a theory of Dazai or a theory of Dazai as a writer.
はい。とりあえず以上です。
Okay, that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. When I was while I was listening to you, Miura-san, I was thinking how again there is kind of a in some Dazai works, especially the early ones, there's this kind of element that he wants to incorporate the criticism of his works in the text itself, in a way preempt the critics. So you have kind of a passage and then another narrator comes in and says, this is awful, this is so mawkish and sentimental, what are you pretending you're doing, this is so weak. So it just strikes me that this approach is just so relevant to Dazai. Jagoda, can I also ask you, what would your approach be to Ningen Shikaku or to any other Dazai work that you're thinking of working on?
So I do want to explore nihilism, definitely, but I want to as well explore absurdism in it as well. It's kind of mix of this too, because I want to I don't want to present to the audience just completely despair, even though it is. I want to find a little bit of light in it, and I think I can do that if I show that how life can be actually absurd, because when you do look at his life, and it is a life that he had, and it can be quite translated as absurd life. So the other thing is I love the feeling of despair that he had, and that as well I can explore historical and economical aspect. I can as well, the other thing I want to explore present time and past, which is when I look at it today, technology specifically, and how we actually as a human interacts in today's age, and how it affects us, and how we get very easily alienated because of that. So I would like to incorporate that bit, because in the past he was talking a lot about alienation as well. So probably merging that. And the other thing I want to introduce to the audience, to not to forget that even in today's age, we have a war. Example would be Iraq and Palestine. Or I come from a country, I grew up during the war and I experienced the post-war. And I know what it does to people and what kind of society, what is born out of that. And DAZAI is that person born out of that. And we have in the present time as well, right now in Iraq and Palestine, if I'm going to compare, many people born like that, with that kind of numbness and despair and a very nihilistic attitude over to the world. So I want to introduce that and kind of make people, hello, we have this still there, even if it's not into your face, but we have it.
You actually preempted my next question, so maybe I can bring in James and then Miura-san. So DAZAI wrote at a very particular time, this kind of trans-war period, you know, so there was before the war. There was, of course, kind of this sort of glittering Americanized Tokyo. Then things sort of get darker and more kind of, you know, totalitarian, more militarized. And then you have sort of the chaos, the confusion of the post-war period. And, you know, Goodbye sort of is a very comical work, the work Goodbye, but it's about everything being a transaction, like, you know, gestures, people, food, and stuff. All relationships seem to be kind of transactional. So, James, what about this kind of DAZAI's historical and cultural context? I mean, Jagoda already sketched about how it's kind of can be connected to our own time, but what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm interested in the way this question has to do with the perception of DAZAI's works as somehow I don't know, juvenile in a way. Like I think there's a lot of negativity in his works that connect to or that resonate with the cultural moment that a lot of us are in. His narrators feel like imposters. They're racked by self-doubt about, you know, not committing enough to political causes. And they're also very explicitly dealing with the question of their own privilege. And the thing that gets me is that these qualities are often used to describe his work as, well, for instance, this one critic has called it Eien no Seishun Bungaku, like the eternal youth literature, right? Or another quote, Seishun no Hashika, it's like adolescent measles. It's like a like critics sometimes treat DAZAI as a phase that you're supposed to grow out of, and I think it's kind of dismissive of the realities of his contemporary readership, right? In a time when there was a crackdown against people involved in leftist politics, right? And I don't know, to treat these issues as a kind of phase that you're supposed to grow out of feels to me like you're saying, like people are saying, okay, it's time to grow up and you have a responsibility to accept the status quo. But I think this is what, I don't know, this is what may help DAZAI sort of cut through the noise now. It's this kind of negativity that allows a kind of clear-sightedness about the world's problems. I think that's how I would put it.
No, I absolutely agree, and it's very easy to dismiss, of course, DAZAI, especially his popularity among the young. But if we come to think about it, you know, all kind of myth and theater and literature is kind of growing up stories, you know, from Oedipus Rex to, you know, Goethe's young Werther, and in Japan, Soseki's Sanshiro and stuff like that. So growing up and sort of coming to terms with the world has always been the stuff of literature. I would like also to ask Miura-san as well about Dazai's time and, you know, our moment. And I was reading the literature on Chiten's performance that sort of seems to focus on sort of Japan's identity crisis, about the kind of the influx of, you know, again, sort of American or Western culture after the war. I think Miura-san says somewhere that it's the war never ended. We've never resolved these conflicts. Would you like to tell us more about this, Miura-san?
まず、太宰治の一つ作家としての特徴っていうのは、外的要素としては戦中戦後の作家であるっていうことですね。
First of, Dazai is pre-war and during he experienced the war as well.
戦中はですね、検閲を逃れるために、古典を翻案したり、さまざまな努力をして、発表し続けた作家です。
So he kept on writing. Obviously, there's a system that the books were banned, anti-political matters you couldn't publish. So what he did was that he was actually translating classics, for example. So he kept on writing, stay on the publishing.
で、1945年に戦争が終わって、わずかもう3年で、あっという間にもう死んでしまうわけですね。
So the Second World War ended in 1945, and in 3 years he's dead.
ただし、その戦後すぐですね、死ぬまでのわずかの間にヒット作を連発しますし、優れた作品が異常にこうハイクオリティで輩出されるわけですよね。
But within that short period, he created masterpieces, great high quality works, and they also sold really well.
変な言い方をすると結果論ですけれども、戦争がなければ太宰は存在してないと思います。
So it might sound strange, but in hindsight, probably without the war, Dazai as a writer wouldn't have existed.
そして現在のアクチュアルな問題として考えるときに、当然私たちの今の今日の段階でも、戦争っていうのは起こっているわけですね。
So how relevant he is with the current world is, yeah, obviously as you mentioned, there are still wars and conflicts going on in the world.
そういう背景のもとに、太宰をこう読むことは可能だとは思います、当然。
So that's one way to look at his work. So, you know, wars are still happening. So things haven't changed much since his time.
太宰の人気についてその側面から考えると、やはり、非常に女性を主人公にするのが非常に上手な作家であった女学生であったり、ビヨンの妻に代表されるような妻であったり、あるいは斜陽に代表されるような少しこう下火になっていく家族ですね。そういった人たちの主人公にすることが非常に上手だった。あとはユーモアが非常にあったっていうことですね。
And regarding his popularity, so you can talk about Dazai from that wars and conflict and time, but I think other big thing about him is that he was really good at writing female characters, say female students in Wife of Fion, the wife in Setting Sun. You know, he was writing about his family that's going down, and also he was very good at humor. He was very humorous.
その辺の軽さって言ったら変ですけど、軽さとかそういった大衆性っていうものが当時で爆発的に人気のベストセラー作家になったわけで、それが今この私たちの今日にこの軽さっていうものがあるのかって言われると、太宰まで戻って確認したいっていうことが皮肉な言い方ですけどアクチュアリティになるのかなっていうふうに今のお話を伺ってて感じました。
So this sort of lightness made Dazai popular, and that's still making him popular right now. So, but it's been how many years since he wrote all of these. So I just wanted to make sure, and I wanted to get back to Dazai and make sure that lightness, my interpretation is correct. And also, yeah, just wanted to make sure that's what it was and still is.
とりあえず以上です。
And I think that's about the relevance. That's why he's still relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll kind of stay gradually towards the questions from the audience. There's one which was kind of on my list as well for Jagoda and for Miura-san. Maybe Jagoda first. What do you think are the biggest challenges for, in adapting Dazai for the stage?
I guess the biggest challenge would keep it to the truth, because I do want to actually, because I'm adapting from the book directly, and I did actually have a person in a team who is Japanese, because as well I want to look at how to phrase some words in Japanese so it doesn't come directly to English. So I guess that's a barrier as well English, where you need to do proper research of the words, what they meant. And then I guess the text, which part of the text is important, because when you read No Longer Human, to me, everything looks so important, because it's such a beautifully written that you want to cherish each word, but you can't do that. So you have to actually devise it going to the theater, devise it and see how it goes naturally with actors, not to force it. I think it's more what comes to actors and to us comes naturally, and how we flow with it. And the other is to keep it to the truth, because I do want to respect as well, not just make it my personal vision, but actually respect the Japan, DAZAI, his work, and to show that on the stage. So I would say 80% of DAZAI and maybe 20% of Jagoda. So finding this kind of proper balance, I think that can as well cause an issue. But yeah, but a lot of devising, I recommend. Yeah, that's for me.
So Miura-san, as well, you mentioned that before Goodbye, you've adapted quite a few of Dazai's work for the stage as well. What were the challenges?
そうね、太宰はその皮肉が面白いんですよね。
So irony, he's very good at it. Sarcasm, he's very good at it.
それがお客さんがというか演じてる側もお客さんもそれを同時に一緒に感じられるかっていうとなかなかその難しいところはまあ一つありますね。
So the challenge is, would the actors get that? And also, would the audience feel that at the same time? So that was a challenge.
まあ、あとはお客さんは読者と一緒のところがあって、今日の話でも出てましたように、私だけの太宰っていうのを求めるんですよ。
And also, the audience, as well as readers of the book, they want my Dazai that I understand.
だから自分だけが太宰を理解しているっていうことですから、演劇は大衆に向かってやるんで、なかなか反発もありますね。こんなの太宰じゃないっていう。
So the difficult thing is, so it's my Dazai, only I can understand him. So obviously the theater production is for the wider audience. So it's not personal. So some of the audience would say, "Oh, that's not my Dazai. That's not the Dazai that I know." So that's again another challenge that we might face.
まあそういったつまりは何が言いたいかっていうと、私小説をどうやって舞台で公に上げるかっていうことが太宰をやる意味であるし、最大のポイントになるんだと思うんですよね。
So I mean, what I'm trying to say is that's exactly the point of doing DAZAI on stage, how to create a theater production from this I novel.
まあ、それのためにはもう手段を選ばずに、太宰にこだわらず、何でもやれることはやると、どのように太宰が普遍性を持っているのかっていうことが僕のチャレンジになっています。
So my challenge is again the relevance. So you just can't choose the method. You just have to try everything. So in a way that I have to liberate myself from Dazai in order to tell his story. And again, that's what I can do to make Dazai's work relevant to this time.
まあ、グッドバイではもう本当にロックバンドと一緒に組んで、ロックコンサートのような作品になってますから、非常にいわゆる太宰の詩小説の非常にそういう読書感、読語感とは全然違うと思いますけどね。
So I think Goodbye is quite different from reading it because we've got a rock band. So it's pretty much like a concert. So yeah, it's very different from the impression that you get from the original book.
とりあえず以上です。
That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I was thinking, Miura-san, while listening to you, that Dazai is indeed very good at kind of creating this community between reader and Dazai himself, as if you're not even reading a book. I mean, reading a book is a private experience, but as if he's the storyteller and you're sitting together somewhere in a bar, preferably, and you're very special and he's telling this only to you and he's your Dazai. So, and that needs to become a very public and collective experience of the theater. So yes, I perfectly understand that. So, and I think this is again, sort of the challenge of translating him. So, James, what are the challenges, but also what are the pleasures of translating Dazai, if any at all?
Yeah, I think when it comes to Dazai, the pleasures and the frustrations are often one in the same thing. You mentioned the feeling that Dazai is directly speaking, to the reader, and it strikes me that sometimes in his early works, there's a kind of it seems to me like a kind of hastiness or a choppiness in the prose. It's really short. You get these kind of passages where it's the one short sentence after another. And this is something that some previous translators have not chosen to emphasize. They've combined them into longer sentences and almost beautified the prose in a way. And I have to be clear and say that I adore the older translations, but at the same time, it often seems to me that some translators want to kind of redeem Dazai as a like in terms of style. It's almost as if like there needs to be some kind of intricate, beautiful prose style to offset or justify the negativity in terms of the content. But I really prefer, I don't know, my Dazai to be unredeemed. Like there's a story in which a young writer is described as bungaku no kuso kara umareta yona otoko, like a young man born from the sprung from the dung heaps of literature. And there's an attitude behind that and a heat behind that, and I want to hear it. And there's also in some of the early works, there's the sense that the works themselves are not quite, they're just barely holding together, and Dazai or some kind of version of Dazai is aware of it, and you feel his desperation. And I want to feel the intensity of that and to allow readers to feel the intensity of that. And so these become questions of attitude and texture that go beyond the way that people sometimes think of translation as just some kind of neutral transfer, right, of the meaning of one sentence in one language to the meaning of in another sentence. So that's been a challenge for me. Another challenge is has to do with his his visual sensibility. He spends a lot of energy describing very culturally specific items in terms of clothing and even the material that clothing is made out of, in a way that was probably it probably connected very readily to the imaginations of his readers, but people who don't share that same cultural knowledge, I don't know, it might seem like a strange focus or a strange kind of obsession with appearances. I'm not sure exactly how to solve the problem, but.
Okay, we have a very active audience, and I apologize in advance because we might not be able to answer all the questions. There's quite a few in the Q&A, but I would want just to pick questions or even combine them together related to what our panelists have been talking about. So we have a very good questions about the sense of alienation, the this sort of existentialist void and stuff. And Jagoda picked up on his nihilism. So Jagoda, would you like to talk a little bit more about how does he connect to other nihilistic writers or philosophers, or to existentialism, or in general, whether does he connects to any philosophy at all?
I think, Jen, for me personally, when I read, especially, I read other the books, and there's constant tone of, I would say, melancholia in it, and a slowness, a certain slowness that he carries with himself through the books, and then obviously No Longer Human is quite emphasized on that, because obviously he describes the suicides and his life generally, how he needs to adapt to the environment. For generally, I would not say any philosophy, I would say just severe trauma when he was a kid, and that it's triggered, it happened one day, and then since then he changed some, and he just continued to live that kind of way. And I think it's child trauma. I think a lot of people experience that. Some of these days we can actually go to therapies. He couldn't, he suppressed that. He kept it as a monster inside of him. And it's just someone who, I don't want to victimize him, because he's definitely not the type of person, the direction that I'm definitely going with him. I'm just trying to explain the character that I see. I do see him in very negative, and I don't want to idolize him even in a theater. This is definitely not direction I want to go with it. But I just see someone who suffers and doesn't know how to deal with it, and then just creates a chaos along the way, and there's no certain philosophy. I think even when he went into the bar and reading, he was into Dostoevsky as well. So I had a feeling that he even loved that feeling of feeding himself on the melancholia, on feeding himself on depression, on it was even the suicide that he done. I had a feeling like this is the only way that, oh, I feel alive at this point, and I'm going to feed myself of that. So I think it's in a way severe depression, and anyone who this is something I as well want to explore in the future, actually, mental health and the suicide, because sometimes people don't want to commit suicide and then they go into the suicide, and I think there's a connection there as well. Anyone who has severe depression and trauma, DAZAI is a good explanation. So there's no philosophy about it. I think it's just this two. Yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, so also to Miura-san, these are kind of two questions actually on the chat. They probably very much show kind of how Dazai is thought outside Japan. But the questions are whether the death of Akutagawa Ryunosuke was significant for Dazai, and also whether Dazai's death played any role in the death and the suicide of Yukio Mishima. So these are 3 novelists who committed suicide. Miura-san, would you like to sort of speak to that?
太宰は非常に芥川の死にはショックを受けたっていうふうに言われてますね。
Yeah, I mean, it is said that Dazai was heavily affected by the death of Akutagawa.
まあ、ただ、まあ、今、自殺の比較をするのも変ですけど、芥川の場合、確実に精神病分裂ですからね。精神疾患です、芥川の場合は。
So I mean, it's odd to compare, suicides here, to be honest. But in Akutagawa's case, clearly, he had a mental illness. He was ill.
で、太宰の場合はそこまで精神疾患とはちょっと言い難いですね。
So I think in Dazai's case, it's slightly different from Akutagawa's case.
ただ、まあ、薬の中毒であったことはありますので、体力的にきつかったことは事実だとは思います。
But he had addiction, so he was physically actually not fit.
で、ここで、非常に重要なことは、芥川は中国漢詩とか、そういった中国の文学に非常に、長けてたわけですね。
And Akutagawa was knowledgeable about Chinese literature, Chinese culture.
で、まあ、でもほぼ国外に出ることはなかった。
But 彼自身が出るってことですか？
はい。
So he never went abroad.
で、当然、太宰も戦争中でしたし、なかなか国外に出ることができなかった。
And obviously, nor did Dazai. There was a war, so he wasn't free to travel.
つまり、日本の島国の中で死んでいったわけですね。
So they died in Japan, an island country.
もちろん、太宰はチェーホフであったり、ドストエフスキーであったり、シェイクスピアであったり、もちろん聖書の研究も非常に優れていたので、頭では外の世界っていうのは非常に享受していた、受け入れてたわけです。
So but still, he read and translated and studied Chekhov, Dostoevsky, Shakespeare, and also, he read the Bible. So in his head, he knew the culture.
つまり、ただ、芥川も太宰も日本で、国内で、日本の中で外に出る、ほぼ外に一歩も出ることなく死んでいった作家。
So they died without really going outside Japan.
時代的には三島はその後になりますから全然違いますね。
So Mishima is quite different because he came later, much later.
まあ、三島の場合もほぼ私たち今生きている時代と現代と同じ状況の空気を吸っていたと考えていいと思います。
So, I mean, I think Mishima lived in a period that's quite similar to where we live now.
で、まあ、太宰は戦後間もなくすぐ死ぬわけですけど、彼が提示したやっぱりアメリカナイズの問題っていうこと、ポリティックな問題を三島っていうのは全面的に引き受ける世代になったわけですね。
So Dazai died, shortly after the war ended. So in a way, Mishima took over the issues of this Americanization and modernization after the war.
まあ、それで有名なように三島っていうのは非常に、まあ、切腹っていう、まあ、最大のパフォーマンスを成し遂げたわけですけれども、まあ、そういう形で死んでいくわけですね。日本男子として。
So, I mean, this is a famous story how he died. He did harakiri. That was the biggest performance ever. And he died as a Japanese man.
まあ、そういう意味では、道化っていうか演技っていう意味では三島は太宰のこと嫌いだったみたいですけど、引き継いだという皮肉な言い方もできますね。
I think it's a kind of ironic because, I said Mishima took over what Mishima started. But then again, Mishima clearly hated crowning of Dazai. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure if I can actually compare them, but hey.
まあ、一つだけきちんと言っておくと、太宰にとって自殺っていうのは、まあ、一つのネタですからね。ネタ。
So,
材料でしかないですから。
So one thing I can actually say is for Dazai, suicide is kind of like a topic that he can pick up for his writing. That was the part of him, part of what he can say.
彼にとって自分の生命っていうものは一つの材料でしかないと思います。
So even his life was a material for his writing. It's a
例えば社用っていうものが一人の女性の日記を盗むように、彼は全部中身が空っぽで、どんどん自分自身のことも盗んでいっちゃったわけですね。
So like Setting Sun, you know, it's a woman's diary. Again, you stole it from her. So Mishima was empty. He was empty inside.
だから、何か悩み尽くして自我を掘り尽くしてこう何かを書き尽くすっていうよりは自分が空っぽだからこそ、どんどん外のものを吸収しながらそれを排出していくっていうタイプの作家だと思うので、世界的に見てもちょっと珍しい作家であることは確かだと思います。
So it's not like it's not about his ego. So you know he wasn't struggling with his ego or himself. He was more like because he's empty, he had to observe things from the outside, and then he creates something out of it. So I think from that point of view, he's quite rare as an actor because it's not about himself. He's quite empty.
まあ、太宰の死後間もなくしてから親族の方から、一応遺書というものが発表されていまして、その理由が書けなくなったから死ぬっていうことは信じていいと思います。
So you know, after he died, the family published his will, and he wrote there that he's dying because he can't write anymore. And I think it's true. That's how he felt.
とりあえず以上です。
Thank you.
Thank you. I was listening to you, Miura-san, and sort of thinking of this. I think it was a Nietzsche quote that for a writer, everything which for other people is content is pure form, including their own life. And maybe that kind of relates to that as well. You mentioned about Joseito and Dazai writing women very well. And I think both kind of Jagoda and James also sort of hinted at that. Can we talk about that as sort of a misogyny, a kind of a hint and nuance in Dazai, and how does, for example, Jagoda relate to that? Do you think Jagoda did these kind of you know, passages or elements should be expunged from a theatre production? And also James as well, again, you know, about translating such stuff and Dazai's portrayal of women. And this is the last question, I'm sorry.
So I wouldn't actually edit it out. That's my especially I understand misogyny and feminism, and we want to empower it, but I don't think it's the correct to actually cut out things that this is part of his personality. This is who he was, and some things can be read as a misogyny. Some things can be confusing, very confusing things, but I would never edit things out. If I want to show, like we all people have like negative sides in us. This is me not justifying him again. I'm just saying that we all have it, something that is very bad. And if we died and someone wrote something about us, we would that person will find a lot of things that we didn't disclose, and we will put it out on a stage. I don't think it's ever a good idea to edit out. I think you just want to show the person as it is, and then you can actually like it or dislike it. And if you dislike his personality, that's completely fine. That's completely fine. You don't need to agree with what you're saying, but there's many other things, qualities that you can find in him that you like. It's really up to you. Yeah, that's for me.
James, you've been very deep in sort of Dazai's texts, especially the early ones. what do you think about his portrayal of women and the images of women?
Yeah, it's certainly nothing to celebrate. I think I'm with Jagoda on that. These are things that need to be left in the text because they gesture to realities outside of the text, and it's a good way to keep us from idolizing someone whose behavior was, to put it mildly, problematic, right? It's kind of like we need to remember who we're stepping over on our way to celebrate Dazai's artistry. Like there's a point at which we need to look down at the bodies, so to speak, right? I mean, two women lost their lives in double suicide attempts with Dazai, Hanabe Shimeko and Yamazaki Tomie. So yeah, I absolutely think that leaving it in the text, leaving the misogyny in the text is strange. It might sound strange to say that, but it's I don't know, it's a good way of reminding us of that reality.
I think I would like to close this here. Thank you for all our people in the audience, 150 from all over the world. And Dazai's books are widely available. Seek them, form your own opinion. Unfortunately, not all of us would be able to see Chiten, but probably at some point. Thank you very much. And I'll hand over to Takekawa-san from the Japan Foundation.
Hi, thank you very much for, first of all, that's Irene, for handling that roundtable discussion so well. And also that's all of the panels, MIURA-san, James, and Jagoda. It's very strange that we all think that we know Dazai, to some degree. I mean, partly for Japanese, it's always in the textbook. So you can't really live with that, touching upon that Dazai, but by hearing today's discussion, there was so much that I even didn't know. So much sort of, issues there, and there's so many different approaches to Dazai's work for theatrical sort of form, for, literature, translation. So it was really inspiring. Thank you so much. So before we leave, that Ida-san just bring up to the information of that not this one. That's yes, Chiten Theatre Company. Goodbye. It starts from that 5th of March and running until that 9th of March, Saturday. And even I didn't know that would be a lot of that rock music. And then I'm really looking forward to attending myself. So if you have any time or just coming around in London, please join us in Coronet Theatre in London. So that's all from me, and thank you for Etsuzen-san for interpretation. Thank you so much, and then I hope you enjoy it. And then we will send you that questionnaire. If you just complete it, that would be great. So thank you, and then have a nice weekend. Bye to all of you. Bye-bye.